a teenage film snob, baby. I was a teenage film snob, baby.
Marvel's first family, Mr. Fantastic, The Invisible Woman, The Human Torch, and The Thing in their first movie that was never released. Was it somehow blocked by the Wizard? Mole Man? Dr. Doom? Galactus? No! Even worse, the Fantastic Four's biggest villain turned out to be Roger Corman and Bernd Eichinger. It's the superhero movie you've never seen. Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, and this is why you should watch 1994's The Fantastic Four, if you can find it. We're back, everyone, to another episode of Why You Should Watch. This week we're going down a different path. Definitely a film that has been critically panned and panned by a lot of audience members as well. However, this one's unique because it never had an official release. This is a film that was blocked, it was shelved, it was produced simply to retain the rights of the product itself. And because of that, it's never had an official release. There's no DVD, no Blu-ray, no streaming, no VHS, unless you go down the road of bootlegging. I am, of course, talking about the Fantastic Four. So let's talk about who was behind it. Let's talk about some stats. Then we'll go through the history of the film and, of course, why you should watch it. So, the director of this film was Ole Sassoon, who did some TV directing. He directed episodes of Hercules, Xena, and Mortal Kombat Conquest, all shows in the 90s. Previously, Ole was mostly a music video director. That was his background. The film was written by Craig J. Nevius, who had really only worked on B films, and Kevin Rock, who had written Howling for the Freaks and Warlock the Armageddon, which is one of the later parts in the series as well. The studio was Constantine Films, whose name you would see come up later with properties like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. And the film was made on a budget of $1 million. The box office for this film is 0. It was never released, so it never officially earned any money, making it the lowest income of any of the films we've talked about so far, and honestly ever. We're not going to talk about any other unreleased films, I'm pretty sure. So sadly, this is the lowest we'll go, but there we go. The cast of the film: Alex Hyde White as Mr. Fantastic, Jay Underwood as Johnny Storm, Rebecca Starb as the Invisible Woman, Sue Storm, Michael Bailey Smith as The Thing, and Joseph Culp as Dr. Doom. The film has an IMDb score of 3.8 out of 10. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 31% score with both critics and audiences, maybe the only time the audience and the critics have agreed on anything. However, they're all wrong. It's a great film. It's a really good film, and we're going to talk about it. But before we talk about the film and why people don't like it, let's go into the history of it. The history of this film is maybe one of the most fascinating histories of any movie released. So definitely, I'm scratching the surface. There's so much more to dig into, but this is what we're going to talk about today. In 1993, German producer and head of Constantine Films Bernd Eichinger meets with Stan Lee about purchasing the rights to the Fantastic Four. He's unsuccessful. The rights are currently owned by someone else, but 3 years later, he meets with Stan again, and this time is able to purchase the rights for $250,000. Now, for a property like Fantastic Four, that is peanuts. Even in 1980s money. It's nothing for the rights of something like the Fantastic Four, considering how much money that franchise has earned studios since then. For the next 6 years, the Fantastic Four rights with Constantine Films with no film produced. Both Warner Brothers and Columbia Pictures show interest in making a film, but budget concerns halt any and all production development. So they bought the rights, they knocked down the door to get the rights, and then did nothing with them. The rights were due to expire a few years later, and Marvel was declining any extension of the rights, so Eichinger met with Roger Corman, B-movie super director, to put together a movie on a shoestring budget, $1 million. Again, $1 million sounds like a lot of money. It's a lot of money to me. It's a lot of money to you, but for a film, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing, especially in the 80s and 90s. Now you can make films a lot cheaper. Even in the I guess in the 90s, you could make Clerks for $27,000. But the Fantastic Four, with a guy who stretches and a guy made of rocks and a guy who turns into fire and a girl who turns invisible, very expensive film. So $1 million, that's for everything, including advertising. Production begins on December 28, 1992, just 3 days before the rights were due to expire, and shooting wraps less than a month later. There have been some discrepancies on how long the shoot takes. Some people have said 21 days, others have said 25. Again, for an independent film, for a low-budget film, for something like a Clerks, Even something like an El Mariachi, that's totally doable for a Fantastic Four movie. That is a tight schedule. Word spreads about the film. Stan Lee talks about it at comic conventions, magazines and newspapers run advertising, and trailers are shown in the cinemas. A world premiere is scheduled for January 19th, 1994. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, the premiere is cancelled. Cast members receive cease and desist orders to stop promoting the movie, and the studio confiscates all negatives of the film. Eichinger then informs Ole Sassone that the film is not going to be released. This was a shock and a surprise to everyone involved. There were crew members editing the film. There was a composer creating the score. They used their own money to do the score. The composers spent $6,000 to get an orchestra in to put the score together. This film was, to everyone believed this film was getting released. And then it stopped out of nowhere. The movie fades into obscurity. People don't hear about this film. Unless you're in the comic book world. I didn't hear about this film until I was in my 20s. No one knows about the film. It goes into obscurity, and the rights are eventually bought by 20th Century Fox, and 11 years later, Tim Story directs and releases the first official live-action film of the Fantastic Four. During a Comic-Con in 2005, Stan Lee discloses that the film was never intended for release. It was always going to be shelved. Eichinger produced the film on a low budget to retain the rights with the intention of maybe making something later, but that never transpired. Lee advised that he was bought out of his own contract with Constantine Films, as they were supposed to release a movie under the original contract. Bernd Eichinger denies this. The film never has an official release, other than one screening in 1994, at which point the film was bootlegged, and since then has been distributed privately on VHS, DVD, and is now on YouTube as well. So if you want to get a copy of the Fantastic Four, you had to go to comic conventions where people had taped over the tape, over the tape, over the tape. There is actually a Blu-ray now you can get, which we'll talk about, and the people distributing it used AI to repair the film. So whilst we're all very anti-AI, especially in the arts, this might be one exception where the AI has actually helped out a little bit. Fast forward to 2015, Marty Langford directs and releases a documentary entitled Doomed, the untold story of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, which details the events at Constantine Films and provides interviews with the cast and crew of the unreleased film. If you've never seen Doomed, if you've never heard of Doomed, you want to watch this flick. It's incredible. I want to say it's between 90 minutes and 2 hours long, and there's so much information. They interview the whole crew, every crew member who came forward, the entire cast. It gives you so much information. It's so worth your time, and it's fascinating. It is one of the most interesting stories in Hollywood for sure. Fast forward to 2025, and Marvel Studios finally releases their version of the Fantastic Four First Steps, and 31 years after the original scheduled release of the 1994 film, cast members Alex Hyde-White, Rebecca Starb, Jay Underwood, and Michael Bailey Smith are given the chance to cameo in the film, marking their official debut in a Fantastic Four movie. Which is very, very sweet. They were at the premiere. It was very, very exciting. It was very, very cool. So now that we've heard a little bit about the film, let's talk about the complaints. And I will say the complaints are more valid than maybe any other film we've talked about so far, but I'm still going to encourage you to watch it. 3 complaints. The first, the micro-budget restrictions. Totally fair. $1 million for Fantastic Four is insane. There are some really obvious moments when the Invisible Woman is fading and it's clearly like a lens overlay. When Johnny Storm finally flames on and flies around, it looks like a computer game like the Lawnmower Man. And in the final scene, as they're driving away from Sue and Reed's wedding, Reed puts his hand out of the top of the sunroof and it's clearly just a big plastic arm. I will say, though, there's a certain charm to all of it. And despite the fact that it does look cheesy, I really appreciate them trying as hard as they did. The second complaint is the deception of the cast and crew. That's a fair complaint. It's fair to not like this film or want to watch this film because of the people behind it. And I don't mean the crew. I mean the money men, the people up top, Bernd Eichinger in particular. It's fair to not want to support a movie that was designed to tank. But I've talked about this a lot. I don't believe in boycotting a film due to the actions of one person. I remember when Aquaman: The Lost Kingdom came out, the DCEU was closing down. It was announced they weren't going to be moving forward, and all the fans were like, "Well, we're not going to watch this because if they're closing down the DCU, what's the point?" But do you know how many people worked on that film? Like who worked hard on that film? Lighting people, editors, CGI artists, like all these people kind of, put their time and effort into making this product. You've got to, I guess, think beyond it. I don't believe in boycotting a film just because of one bad person. And then the final complaint was creative and pacing issues. I don't really have an issue with the pacing. I think it's aged quite poorly. But if you consider the budget and the fact that it was made in the early 90s and has kind of the look of a soap opera episode, of course it's going to age poorly, but it still works quite well, for me at least. So now that we've talked about the complaints, let's talk about why you should watch it. And this might be my shortest episode ever. It's so funny. First of all, why should you watch it? Comic book accurate story and characters. I watched this for the first time in 2025, in the lead up to the new Fantastic Four movie. I was like, I'm going to watch all of them, including this one that's never been available, and I watched it on YouTube. And I was shocked how accurate it was to the comics and how well developed the characters were. Reed feels like Reed. There is a weird age difference between him and Sue. The first time he meets Sue, she's a child, and then they fast forward 10 years. But he feels like Reed. Sue feels like Sue. Johnny feels like Johnny, and Ben feels like Ben Grimm. The relationship between Ben and Johnny is quite pleasant. There's some making fun of each other, like we saw in First Steps, but it's not mean-spirited like the Tim Story films, which I quite enjoyed. And Doctor Doom feels like Doctor Doom. Speaking of which, if there is one reason you should watch this film, it is Joseph Culp's performance as Victor Von Doom. He's so good in it. He's evil and cruel and mustache twirling, with his villainy, I should say. There's a real Shakespearean theatric to his performance, which I really, really dig. And to be fair, I don't think we've had a bad Doctor Doom. Every single actor who's played Doctor Doom, whether you like their interpretation or not, I think has done a great job. The late, great Julian McMahon was a fantastic Doctor Doom. I thought that Toby Kebbell was really good as well. I know people didn't like that they changed his origins, and we are going to talk about that Fantastic Four movie at some point. That is going to be a film we talk about on this show. But I felt his portrayal, his performance was great. And next up, we've got Robert Downey Jr., who I'm sure going to smack it out of the park. But in the meantime, Joseph Culp, I think, is the best version we've seen. I think he's really, really good. And for that reason, you should definitely check it out. I also think you should watch it. Next up is that it leans into the cheese. And what I mean by that is the Fantastic Four has always been a little bit silly, which is why I'm always surprised when people got upset by the new film about it being silly and cheesy and stuff like that, because that's what the Fantastic Four are. Your main character, your leader, is literally a man made of rubber. It doesn't get much sillier than that. And this one leans into it, especially, as I mentioned before, that big plastic arm. And some of the cheesy dialogue, and then look at the very almost sitcom kind of affection they show each other, and the melodramatic kind of frustration when things go wrong. It's all very much in keeping with this tone of the 60s comic books, and I really dig that. For a film that had a low budget and alternative intentions, I think they did a pretty good job of capturing the spirit of what it was supposed to be. People might fight me on this one, but I also think a reason to watch this film is the Thing's costume. It's kind of beautiful in a really ugly way. We had the practical costume in the Tim Story films with Michael Chiklis playing the Thing, but since then they've gone CGI. The new version was a hybrid of practical and CGI. They had a big mold that Ebon wore, and then they masked it with CGI, similar to the way that the Iron Man suits work, or the way Marvel does most things. But this was completely practical. It was homemade. The face didn't move properly, but it looked, again, comic accurate. It had the big, heavy brow. The eyes maybe a bit small for my liking, if I'm honest. But I really appreciate the attention to detail. Again, they had a low budget and they sunk a portion of their budget into making this realistic Thing costume. And I really like that attention to detail. It's very in keeping with the aesthetic of the film, with the tone of the comics, and it just makes it feel a bit more tangible and gives it a bit more life. So I really like that as well. And the final reason you should watch The Fantastic Four from 1994, it might be a bit of a cop-out answer, but the reason I think you should watch this, or more than any other reason, is chances are you haven't seen it. Most people haven't seen it. Most people aren't even aware of its existence. And I think a hidden gem, this kind of buried treasure from the last 30 plus years should be seen by more people. So I'm encouraging you to watch this film, not because it's great, even though I quite like it, not because it's the definitive Fantastic Four film, not because it's the best comic book film, not for any other reason than it was made. People worked on this. They sunk their hard efforts into this. They wrote a script and they designed costumes and they scored it and they read and rehearsed their lines and they promoted it, and it never ever saw the light of day. And that's one of the worst things you can do with art, is work so hard on something and then have no one ever see it. So for that reason alone, I think you should watch The Fantastic Four from 1994. It's fun, it's cheesy, it's silly, but there's some really great stuff in there. You can watch it for free on YouTube right now. There are bootlegs available. The guy Marty Langford, who directed the documentary Doomed, you can buy a double pack of the documentary and an AI remastered version of the original film. It looks and sounds pretty good for a bootleg, so I would recommend checking that out as well. But that's it. I think it's probably the shortest episode I've ever done of why you should watch, but, with not too many kind of things to talk about. The story, I think the history of the film is very interesting, but that's a whole other episode. And the documentary captures it perfectly. So go and watch this and watch Doomed. Get that double pack. I think it cost me like $50, and what an entertaining few hours I had watching both of those. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and again, that's why you should watch The Fantastic Four. I'll see you next week.